like a couple other things I wanted to talk about because I guess this is how I regulate myself until I find proper therapy, which is on the way soon. And thankfully today I got in touch with someone through my family who handles like online investigation stuff and hackers and all that BS. So one's kind of negative and the other's positive. Well, not really negative, but serious. Is having gone through a lot of what I've been through and having spoken to quite a few people recently who've been through similar things. There's this weird kind of post millennial trend where we're super aware of things like BPD or ADHD, autism, mental health, and the certain types of care that we need for them. And conversely, we're also aware of how these things were frequently mishandled and misdiagnosed. Like, we show more empathy for people with ADHD because we know that we used to misdiagnose them as anger management issues. Same with autism. We are more empathetic to men and women with BPD, where we used to just say that they were crazy. We're more empathetic to people with schizophrenia because we used to lock them up, and now we know that certain drugs can reduce or completely mitigate their symptoms. And so there's this phenomenon that I'm seeing, which I want to kind of giggle at it because online everybody calls it gang stalking, and there's like a few different ways to look at it. One, people can use gang stalking as a kind of slang insult, and basically gang stalking for these people is just code for drug-induced psychosis or mental psychosis of another form. For some other people, especially in abuse survivor communities, in hacking communities, in spiritual and tarot communities, gang stalking literally just means any group of people who've coordinated to monitor or stalk you or abuse you. And then on YouTube and in entertainment communities, it tends to be the prior. I have a real bone to pick with like Vice News and all of the other content creators because I think it mashes two issues together and simultaneously disrespects both. So on one hand, yes, there's definitely people who've been through psychosis and they think like the government's stalking them and blah 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 blah. But if that's the case, those people need care, not mockery. And the fact that Vice News had an excellent chance to actually speak with people who suffer from psychosis and just present a documentary that way. Say, hey, here's a documentary on people who suffer from psychosis, specifically paranoid psychosis, and here's their personal story of how it affects them, what they believe is happening, and what started the delusion. They could have just presented it that way. Hey, here's a documentary about paranoid schizophrenia, and here's the stories of people who suffer from that particular type of mental illness. Still could have gotten your views. You still could have utilized those people's struggles for money and clout and simultaneously given them a chance to raise awareness by talking about it. And then Vice could have doubled their views by making an entirely separate video on have you ever been unfairly monitored by law enforcement? Have you ever been stalked by actual gang members? Have you ever had an ex-friend or an ex-lover or a family member organize group stalking? That way you could have doubled your views, doubled the coverage, doubled your clout, and still given both groups the humanity and the respect and the interest they deserve. That's what I would have done if I worked for Vice News. Hey, Vice News, if I don't end up getting euthanized before finding answers to my abuse, then hey, I can be your creative director. So that's kind of a funny little thing that I wanted to point out. And also, the scariest one, the third secret option, what if you've been through both? Can you imagine being an ex-trafficking victim currently suffering from paranoid psychosis who is literally being stalked by a small government branch or stalked by a group of traffickers, or then you're dealing with both of those at the same time while people on the internet make fun of you and they just say it's because you smoke too much drugs? That's pretty terrifying, isn't it? On one side, people are discrediting you because they don't know anything about mental health or drugs or trafficking. On the other side, you might actually have people stalking you. And then on the third side, you also have your own brain working against you. That's pretty horrifying, especially if you're going to mash it together for a documentary for views on YouTube, isn't it? So, in this post millennial kind of consciousness where we're trying to be more aware and respectful of abuse victims, SA victims, people who suffer from mental illness, and people who are neurodivergent, Why is it that in this world, especially since, by the way, I've met like 15-year-olds who can comfortably hack into into company databases. I've met teenagers who can comfortably access their parents' phones on the same Wi-Fi, even if they're behind like via or VPNs. Hacking isn't just accessible, it's easy. I could pay like a 18-year-old from somewhere in the East. Actually, that sounds kind of racist. My apologies, but I could pay some 18-year-old who's in a foreign location to more or less subvert legal loopholes and hack anybody as long as I provide their phone number. And it would cost me like what, $60? So in the exact same world where spying and hacking is a multi-billion-dollar industry and where we know teenagers can do it, why is it that we're so quick to dismiss people who talk about being stalked? Especially since if you're quiet for long enough and you actually listen to these people, most of them have stories about where the stalking was witnessed, where abuse resulted from and was linked to the stalking, where physical in public harassment occurred because of the stalking, that sort of thing. You know what I mean? I mean, God, you can buy a pinhole hidden camera that's 4K ultra high definition and has 80 gigabytes of internal memory on Amazon and disguise it in a house plant for less than $100. You can buy directional audio speakers that have a audio width of about 1 meter, and you could blast it specifically at your neighbor, 60 feet away from you while they sit at the dinner table, and no one else in your neighbor's house would be able to hear it as long as you keep it pointed at your neighbor. You can order that off of Amazon for $50, and you could play corn moan sounds into their ears from 60 yards away, and nobody else in that person's house would be able to hear it. Um, I think we just need to accept that there's a really big intersection right now of technological abuse, online trafficking, blah, blah, blah. That's basically the only point that I wanted to make about that. And kind of unrelated but partially related, something I've realized over the past few months as I get closer to the MAID process and as I'm also kind of putting in my last ditch efforts to find justice and hopefully preserve and save my life and live normally as a gay man, is something I touched on a little bit in the first two videos, which is where are gay men, lesbians, trans people really more free and accepted? Or have we just swapped from being socially and physically abused to being sexually idolized and having higher street value now that the people who used to abuse us know how to covertly profit from us? Because one thing I've noticed is that the huge detrimental effects that my survived abuse has had on me, as I used to find it so comfortable to just talk to men and meet people on Grinder or go on dates or um, all that stuff. And as someone where I was known as like obnoxiously comfortable with my sexuality from like the age of 13 onward, like precociously comfortable with my sexuality at a young age, I'm now like that person where if a genuinely nice guy who's got like a decent bank account isn't trying to objectify me, doesn't have corpses in his freezer, and he's just trying to like talk to me, I'll literally get up and run in the other direction the moment I even feel a small tinge of fear, which is sad because that is conversion therapy. If abuse, and this is something if you're watching and you're LGBT, if consistent technological, psychological, and or sexual, if any kind of abuse consistently interferes with your ability to be an LGBT person in the realm of intimacy and romance, and you've repeatedly made it aware to everyone who you think is involved that that's what it's accomplishing, they are performing conversion therapy, which is not only a recognized form of medical abuse and psychological abuse here in Canada and in, I think, several states in America, but it's also a hate crime, or it could be argued that it's a hate crime. So, with that in mind, this is where we kind of shift into the positive focus. I was kind of embarrassed. I thought it was cringy of me, but I realized that a significant amount of therapy or like self help that I've been getting lately is funny enough scrolling through Instagram and looking at hot dudes and just like posting little comments like, "Oh, you look good today," or like the tree climbing emoji. If they're being extra thirsty, is something that I think that we don't really look at enough. Well, we do actually. It's changing. It's changing for the better. And I've noticed that men and women, straight and LGBT, like everybody's getting better with this. But when we see women that are just openly celebrating their bodies, their sex drives, and all that stuff, we still persecute them, but we're getting way better at saying, like, yes, queen, girl boss, celebrate yourself, go have fun. And I think that's healthy. I think that's good as long as they're comfortable with themselves and that's what they want in life. And so I realized that when I was young, I used to need to hear like scientific and religious literature, very highbrow, serious things that told me it's okay to be gay. I needed to hear scientists say it was okay to be gay. I needed to hear psychologists and religious leaders and artists and musicians say that it was okay to be gay. I needed to see romance movies and really like advanced, sophisticated stuff that like establish the overarching themes of human love and one love. But as I got older and I became more attractive and people started to interfere with that, I realized that the very simple, the very physical, the very sexual, those became things that were just as sacrosanct and just as religious and just as important. Something as simple as just smelling a dude or being close or celebrating male fitness seems very shallow, and a lot of people make it shallow. But that's your body. Your soul and your brain, your mind comes from the body. The physical comes first. You can come up with your little root chakra metaphors if you're interested in spirituality, because it does track. And so as the abuse that I went through as a child was more overtly physical and philosophical and religiously based, I needed a equal amount of positive stimulus from that direction. But as I got older and a lot of the abuse became covert, sexual, trafficking, and that sort of stuff, I found that I needed just, and this is where it's going to sound funny, but I don't care, to see a literally beautiful, handsome dude celebrating his physical body and not being ashamed of it. And that's when I started to realize that a lot of my straight male friends don't experience that, or at least it's not as approachable for straight men as it is gay men. And sometimes that's in reverse, depending on the community you're a part of, for sure. But I think that's one of the happy notes that I want to end on. Because there's so many poems and there's so many like movies and songs and even religious passages about how beautiful the vessel and the structure of the woman is, and the Holy Father and the seed and the child and the progeny, and all that's very good. Like I sound like I'm making fun of it, but I think it's beautiful. But I don't think there's enough of a poetic approach to the rudimentary nature of male sexuality. When it comes to celebrating rudimentary heterosexuality, there's tons of it. You know, you've got Anthony Kiedis talking about juicy hot plums, and you've got what's his face? There's that song, "I really love your peaches, want to shake your tree." You've got Bob Marley singing about, take a walk on the wild side. There's so many musicians, artists, movie makers who take that fun, gritty, basic aspect of heterosexuality and they venerate it to an almost holy level. And I think that for a lot of gay men at my age who've been through a lot of abuse and stalking and trafficking, we don't always have that readily available for us. And that's why I think sometimes you need to hear a pulpit preacher say that it's okay to be gay, or a scientist say it's okay to be gay. But sometimes you just need like a hot, sweaty dude who's like celebrating himself with absolutely zero shame, gooning all the way out. And then you realize, oh my God, it's fun to be a dude. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be evil. It doesn't have to be hateful. It doesn't have to be inherently more risky than straight people live. It doesn't have to be brutal, and it shouldn't be something that everyone feels entitled to. If I, for example, this has happened to me, if I started digging through a trove of a straight guy or a woman's BDSM nudes and posting them online to suggest that they were a predator, people would rightly punch me in the mouth. Whereas I and a lot of gay men and lesbians and trans people I know have participated in kinks or fetishes or BDSM, and people will literally post that on the internet, which encourages people to traffic and abuse us, and then they get away with saying they did it to protect the children. Like, girl. So, I don't know. I kind of wanted to add another video, a more quick and positive and simple one. And if you're a gay dude where you feel like you can't physically connect with the world and it's causing an almost religious, psychological level of disparity in your life, then you should be happy to know that even simple things like taking care of your body, masturbating, having sex, following thirst trap guys on Instagram, going to a gym, telling men that they look fucking good, seeking those compliments and validation from other gay men is not only healthy, but it's important and it is religious and it is psychological, it is spiritual, and it is completely of God. So that's the little thing that I wanted to share. And your life is always worth so much more than any amount of money can dictate, and your life is always worth so much more than any project or experiment can dictate, and your life is always worth so much more than a bunch of jealous closet homos can dictate. So take care of yourself and enjoy being physical. Because in a lot of the good religions and the good spirituality, the physical part, the